What if the ghosts of World War II weren't just the soldiers who fell, but the machines they trusted with their lives, buried in rust and forgotten hangars, whispering tales of impossible escapes and silent victories that history dared not repeat? Picture this: a grey English morning in 2022, rain spitting like shrapnel from low clouds over the Imperial War Museum at Duxford, where over 200 steel birds huddle under leaky roofs, their wings clipped by time, each rivet a scar from skies that swallowed squadrons whole. Two explorers, Tomes and Louee Dessent, step out from the mist, hearts pounding with that raw thrill of the hunt, breath fogging in the chill because today isn't about the famous Spitfires or Mustangs roaring for crowds under spotlights that chase away the dark. No, they're chasing the rarities, the oddballs that slipped through the war's meat grinder and somehow survived the scrapyards and the bombers' fire. Each one a puzzle piece to battles we thought we knew by heart. The dogfights over the Thames, the night raids that lit Hamburg like a funeral pyre, the quiet drops behind enemy lines where whispers turn to uprisings. The air hums with diesel and oil, the ground slick under boots that crunch on gravel pitted by decades of tyre tracks, and as the Battle of Britain Airshow gates creak open with a groan like an old wound reopening, they split paths like commandos in the dark. One to the restoration hangars, where welders coax life from skeletons, the other to the shadowed corners of the American wing, where giants sleep in dust motes dancing like flak bursts, racing to unearth the planes you've never heard of, the ones that flew missions too strange, too fragile to make the history books or the grainy reels that flicker in schoolrooms. But why here? Why now? In this corner of Cambridgeshire, where the fens stretch flat and unforgiving, mirroring the endless patrols over the North Sea, because in these relics beats the pulse of a war that devoured millions. Pilots who tasted cordite and fear in equal measure, ground crews who patched holes with prayers and chewing gum, and unearthing them isn't just nostalgia for leather helmets and silk maps. It's a reckoning with what we lost, the fragile threads of ingenuity that held the line when empires teetered on the brink, and the unspoken cost of survival etched into every faded stencil and bullet-pocked panel. The mist clings like a shroud as they part, Luke vanishing into the haze toward the thunder of hammers on aluminum, Louis melting into the gloom of canvas-draped hulks, both men gripped by that electric pull, the what-if of wings that defied gravity and gravity's crueler twin, obsolescence, because somewhere in this labyrinth of lore, a forgotten flyer waits to rewrite the myth of the few against the many. It was just after dawn when Luke pushed through the heavy doors of the Aircraft Restoration Company hangar, the air thick with the scent of varnish and engine dope. Like stepping into a tomb where metal dreams go to gasp their last breaths amid the flicker of arc welders and the low mutter of generators coughing to life. And he froze, eyes locking on her, the Bristol Blenheim, the last of her kind, in the Mark I configuration. A squat-nosed bomber-fighter hybrid that once outran biplanes in the frantic skies over France in those fevered days of 1940. Her twin Bristol Mercury engines, only 6 left alive in the world, radial hearts forged in Birmingham, foundries that churned out miracles under blackout curtains, humming faintly under tarps like a heartbeat from the grave, irregular and stubborn. John Romain, the pilot with grease-streaked hands and eyes sharp as a bayonet honed on a whetstone, pulled back the sheet with a rasp that echoed like a challenge, and there she was, short nose gleaming under harsh work lights that cast long shadows across her bulbous fuselage, Bombay scarred from nights when gunners crammed in a Vickers K machine gun, firing blind into the black, while Luftwaffe shadows clawed at her tail with cannon fire that stitched the clouds like mad seamstresses. Oh, the tail! That fragile spar where one wild burst could shear it clean off in a spray of splinters and screams, stopped only by a flimsy safety plate, mere millimeters of steel, that saved more lives than it should have. Crews tumbling home with stories of inches from eternity, whispering in debrief rooms how the plate buckled but held, a tinny miracle amid the roar. Luke's voice caught, low and urgent, as he traced the wide wings built for desperate climbs over Dover's white cliffs, where chalk dust mingled with exhaust in spirals that marked the graves of the unready, whispering how she'd bombed Berlin in moonlight raids that painted the Reichstag in silver and fire. then switched roles in hours flat to night fighter, her crew sweating bullets, literally .303 rounds hot in their palms, as flak lit the channel like hellfire bursting from the deep, shells whining past like banshees denied their due. But she was fast once, faster than the lumbering bi-wing relics she replaced in the mad rush to rearm, clocking 266 miles an hour in level flight that left early war foes blinking in confusion until monoplanes like Messerschmitt Bf-109s turned her into prey. Overtaken in the sun, outgunned in the dive, yet here she crouched, the sole surviving Mark I, her panels whispering of phony war patrols over the Maginot Line and desperate evacuations from Crete, where her kind dropped supplies to cornered Tommies under Stuka dives that shook the earth like Judgment Day. Ready to roar again with 2 Lysanders and a Gladiator in formation, 5 Mercury engines belting out that ubiquitous growl that shook Europe awake from Munich's uneasy slumber, a radial symphony that echoed from Norway's fjords to the desert sands of Tobruk. Meanwhile, across the rain-slicked tarmac where puddles mirrored the low scud-like shattered glass, Louis ducked into the fighter collection, rain drumming on his hood like Morse code from the dead, dot, dash, dot, a frantic plea from some lost squadron, and spotted the skeleton of the Fiat CR-42 Falco, Italian biplane, half-built wings stacked like broken promises on trestles slick with preservative oil, destined to be the world's only flying example, pulled from a Swedish crash site in '83 after slamming into snow in '42 during a botched ferry flight, her pilot's ghost still tangled in the wires that once sang with wind over the Alps. She danced in dogfights over Britain, outturning hurricanes in the sun-glare madness of the Channel during those hellish weeks of August '40, when eagle squadrons bled for every beachhead, Italian pilots, young aces with moustaches trimmed sharp as switchblades, claiming kills before fuel ran dry, and the cold waves claimed the rest, parachutes blooming like poppies too late, then bled out on the Eastern Front's frozen hell, where Mussolini's Falcons met Stalin's Wolves in skies white as bone over the Don River bend, maneuverable as a knife in a bar fight with her sesquiplane wings slicing turns that left monoplanes wide-eyed in trailing smoke. But by '43, the Yak 9s and Lay 5s chewed her up like wolves on a lame deer, leaving scraps for restorers to stitch back from oblivion in hangars that smelled of regret and rivet guns. Louis's breath fogged the cold metal as he imagined her looping through Malta's siege, the island a rock in the Med's blue furnace, speed bleeding from her veins like the blood of crews who bailed into the drink, salt stinging wounds as destroyers circled like sharks. Never seen again, telegrams crisp and final back in Bari's sun-baked streets. And he grinned, dark and hooked, because this bird wasn't just rare. She was a survivor of theatres from Calais' canals to Crimea's cliffs, waiting 80 years to taste air again, her open cockpit a portal to the raw scream of unfiltered wind that stripped illusions from the brave and the broken alike. The rivalry burned hotter now, Luke texting feverishly about the Blenheim's glass nose bomb site, fragile as a snow globe, etched with crosshairs that guided eggs onto rail yards under moonless skies. Louis firing back pics of the Falco's wire-braced bones, taut as harpstrings tuned for war. Both men chasing that electric rush of discovery, the kind that makes your skin crawl with the weight of what-ifs. What if she'd tipped one more battle in the desert, outfoxing P-40s in the sun-baked furball over El Alamein? What if her kind hadn't faded into footnotes, leaving the skies to the sleek and the soulless, but the hangars held more shadows, deeper cuts into the war's underbelly? Luke veered toward the airspace dome, feet echoing on concrete floors worn smooth by thousands of boots, where the de Havilland Mosquito hung suspended like a predator in amber, chains creaking faintly as if she strained against her bonds, the wooden wonder they called her in hushed tones around pub tables scarred by pint rings, built from balsa and glue because steel was rationed for tanks and dreams weren't, light as a whisper, tough as teak from forgotten colonies. Geoffrey de Havilland hawked her himself when brass laughed her off in boardrooms thick with pipe smoke. Too light, too flimsy, they sneered, visions of splinters raining over the roar, until she clocked 415 miles an hour in trials over Hatfield's fields, outpacing Spitfires in a blur that left test pilots grinning like fools, her pair of Rolls-Royce Merlin V12s churning props so massive they nearly kissed the cockpit glass, blades tip-speed whistling like vengeful spirits. Low loss rate in Bomber Command, That's her scar. Crews ditched her in swells off Norway's coast, and she floated like a cork on the black waves, radar blind to her birch frame that laughed at early warning sets, slipping past flak belts to gut Gestapo HQs in Oslo or Berlin, with 4,000-pound cookies that turned marble to dust. Goering turned green with envy, they say, in yellowed dispatches, pounding his fist on oak desks because she bombed by day in daring daylight raids that stunned the Luftwaffe awake, hunted by night with AI radar sniffing out Heinkels like bloodhounds, 420mm cannons under her chin barking like demons unchained while she danced away at speeds that left hurricanes choking on her slipstream, props carving contrails that mocked the tracers below. Luke circled her, slow as a ritual, spotting the cannon ports scarred from strafing U-boat pens in Brest's fortified harbour, where concrete bunkers spat fury and the Gironde estuary ran red with diesel, his voice dropping to a hush as he pictured the wooden spars flexing under bomb loads that sagged her keel like a burdened atlas, production lines in shadowed factories spitting her out faster than Lancasters because carpenters built her, not welders, hatchet men in overalls shaping ribs from laminates that bent but never broke, over 7,000 sisters rolling off lines from leaves to Luftwaffe wrecks. Underrated? Underestimated, more like, the ghost that won the Precision War while heavies like the Halifax burned in the sky over the fatherland, their aluminum frames melting into fiery comets that lit the blackout. Louis, not to be outdone, slipped into the biplane crypt, a low-roofed shed where the air hung heavy with the tang of aged dope and mothballs, rain seeping through cracks to pool on the floor like tears from the rafters. For the fairy swordfish, Stringbag, they mocked her in wardrooms afloat on carriers that pitched like drunks in the Atlantic swell, relic from the Great War's scrap heap dusted off in desperation, open cockpit lashed by gales that froze fingers to sticks, slick with spray, yet she sank more Axis tonnage than any carrier bird in the Fleet Air Arm's long ledger, torpedoes thumping home in Taranto's harbour under Italian guns that clawed the night sky on November 11, 1940, 21 biplanes threading searchlights like needles in a haystack of tracers, 3 battleships crippled in their berths. The Med's balance tipped in a night of impossible odds where ferries limped back with fabric hold like Swiss cheese, and crews nursing burns from near misses that boiled the water white. Slow as a crawl, crews joked it was like flying downhill with the wind at your back, 90 knots top whack on a good day, her bi-wings folding like a bad memory on Ark Royal's deck amid the clang of arrestor wires. But that sloth made her untouchable, flak bursting wide in lazy blooms, while she droned through storms no monoplane dared touch, black-painted for night hunts on wolf packs that prowled the convoy lanes, her Bristol Pegasus engine a steady thrum against the gale's howl, dropping fish, Mark the 8th torpedoes slung like pregnant promises that doomed battleships to the deep with a sigh and a plume. Louis touched the fabric skin, patched from crashes that swallowed squadrons whole off Norway's fjords in 40, where swordfish braved blizzard squalls to spot cruisers for Hood's guns, and felt the chill crawl up his spine. First Brit plane to nail a U-boat in the war's early chill, punching above her weight when aces flew circles around her obsolescence in polished cockpits. Heroic? Heroic doesn't cover it. She was the underdog that bit back with raking fire from her 303 Brownings. Crews wrapped in oilskins against the roar, faces raw from salt and wind, dropping depth charges that thundered home on submerged shadows, turning the hunter to the hunted in the grey wastes where ice flows carved like tombstones. The day dragged on under a sky that brooded low and leaden, rivalry twisting into brotherhood under the relentless drizzle that turned paths to mire, texts flying like flares across the field, Luke crowing about the Westland Lysander he'd cornered back at Romain's Bay, amid the clutter of jigs and jacks, spy dropper extraordinaire with her high wings perched like a stork on stilts, 3 airworthy left on Earth from the 1,400 that ghosted the night. This one Canadian trained with ladders slung on her flank, like Jacob's dream for resistance, whispers in French meadows moonlit and tense, landing at 50 miles an hour on cow pastures pocked with craters, while Gestapo patrols sniffed the wind like hounds on a cold trail. Bombs in wing stubs for show, a bluff to any prowler, but mostly she ghosted in silent as a sigh. Twin 303s in spat silent too for passenger runs hauling evaders over the Pyrenees' jagged teeth, her Bristol Mercury purring like a conspirator in the weave of hedgerows. Unglamorous amid the roar of typhoons overhead, Louis texted back with thumbs numb from the wet but vital, the thread that stitched SOE agents into the weave of D-Day's shadow war, moonlight circuits where a misjudged field meant capture and the Gestapo's rubber hoses. Luke fired a photo of his wildcard, the Sierva C-30A auto-gyro, tucked in the Battle of Britain shed like a secret shame. Weird hybrid with no fixed wings, just a teetering three-bladed rotor for lift auto-rotating lazy as a falling leaf, and a pusher prop growling forward from her tail boom. 146, ever built in the slipstream of Spanish Civil War experiments, Sierva's brainchild licensed to Brits who flew her slow as sin, 45 knots flat out, to tune radar chains along the cliffs of Dover in the anxious summer of '40, when invasion loomed like a storm front and every blip on the chain home screens meant life or annihilation for the island realm. Helicopter before helicopters proper, they whispered in engineering circles. Invented in Madrid, 23, to cheat stalls that claimed so many in the barnstorming days. But war turned her to a hovering eye over the waves. Crews perched exposed in open frames as the stations blinked to life with pips that painted the horde inbound. Luke laughed, uneasy in the dim light where her blades hung limp like surrendered flags, because she looked wrong, unbalanced, like a drunk on a tightrope strung between towers. Yet she calibrated the eyes that spotted the blitz before it fell in cascades of high explosive and fire that turned London to a forge of defiance. Louis countered with the B-29 superfortress in the American vault, a cavernous space where echoes bounced off corrugated walls like distant AA fire. The not rarest, but the behemoth that ended it all in mushroom clouds over the Pacific's rim, 30 meters of silver fury from nose to tail cone, 61 tons loaded to the gills with avenging fire, winging 3,000 miles non-stop to gut Tokyo's paper districts in firestorms that sucked the oxygen from the night. Then the Enola Gay's sister ships, superforts all, dropping hell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in flashes brighter than 1,000 suns. Remotely gunned turrets whirring like sci-fi nightmares from the bellies where gunners huddled in pressurized cocoons. Computers slaving the fight with servos that tracked intruders before they buzzed close enough to sting. Remote gunners, safe from the fray, sighting through periscopes on Zeros that swarmed like angry wasps over Iwo Jima's black sands. She flew rings around them in the Pacific boil, where monsoons lashed carriers to breaking, her size a promise of apocalypse with Wright R-3350 radials, 4 of them, cyclones in duplex housings, thundering at 100 octane that turned the sky to a furnace. Louis's message trailed off into ellipses. She didn't just fly, she broke the world. Crews emerging from runs with eyes hollow from the glow that lingered on retinas, debriefs silent save for the scratch of pencils tallying the end of an age. As thunder rumbled distant like barrage balloons deflating, they reconvened under the main stage's awning that flapped like a signal flag in the gusts, soaked to the bone and buzzing with the caffeine of close calls. Luke for the autogyro's freakish grace that hovered fate on a whim, and Mosquito's sly speed that thumbed its nose at physics. Louis for Lysander's secret heart beating in moonlit fields, and Swordfish's stubborn bite that gnawed at empires from the wave-tops. Debating fierce as old squadron mates over lukewarm tea in Nissen huts, voices rising with each parry. But the Mossy's Merlins, pure silk. Aye, but the Stringbag's Pegasus laughed at torpedoes that sank dreadnoughts. While the show ignited around them, Blenheim and Lysander's clawing skyward through rain sheeting sideways, Mercury's thundering that primal symphony that rolled across the fens like the first salvos of the Somme. Fiat's frame waiting in the wings like a promise unkept, her ribs a cage for the soul of forgotten Regia Aeronautica eagles. No winner crowned in the downpour, just the raw pull of these last breath machines, urging you to vote in the echo of comments below because unearthing them isn't closure under the sodium lamps. It's the spark that reignites the why of it all, the fragile fury that kept the lamps burning in blacked-out homes from Land's End to Leningrad. The rain eased as the formation climbed, those 5 engines, Blenheim's pair leading the Lysander's singles and the Gladiator's solitary Mercury, blending into a growl that rolled like distant artillery over Duxford's fields, where corn stubble stood sentinel to harvests interrupted by war's plough, pulling every eye skyward from picnickers huddled under brollies to veterans with medals pinned crooked on rain-damp lapels. But Luke and Louis lingered in the mud, churned to soup by feet and tires, trading stories like contraband cigs smuggled past centuries, the Blenheim's tale unfolding in John's gravel voice scarred by years of briefings. how she'd bombed Rotterdam's canals in May 40, the Dutch city's dikes bursting under 250-pounders as crews dodged 109s that shredded her mates mid-formation over the Maas estuary, one gunner clipping his own tail in panic fire from the dorsal turrets, the safety plate crumpling like foil under the strain of ricocheting lead. "Escaped by inches," he said with a wry twist, her wide wings forgiving the sin like a mother her wayward son, carrying ghosts home to Biggin Hill, where ground crews, wrench monkeys with calluses thick as boot leather, patched her with prayers and spit under arc lights that buzzed like angry hornets, canvas stretched taut over frames bent but unbroken. Louis nodded slow, eyes on the horizon where swordfish ghosts wheeled in his mind's eye. Taranto again. That velvet night when the Fleet Air Arm wrote its legend in torpedo wakes, 6 biplanes from Illustrious, threading the gauntlet of Villa San Marco's batteries, flares popping overhead like false dawns while prop wash stirred the harbour's scum, torpedoes slicing water like accusations straight and true, Littorio listing with a groan that echoed across the bay, 3 cruisers crippled in their pens, and the Italian fleet's nerves severed clean, the Med's tide turned in a hail of magnesium that left pilots blinking spots from their vision. But it didn't stop there. Bismarck's hunt in May 41, 15 swordfish from Victorious and Ark Royal braving force 2 gales that whipped the Atlantic to froth, their airspeed bleeding to 40 knots into the wind as they groped through cloud layers thick as porridge, dropping fish blind on radar shadows until one slammed home on the battleship's rudder amidships, jamming her helm hard over while Prince Eugen's guns clawed empty air, the beast turning in circles for King George V's 14-inch shells, to find her vitals 2 days later in the Denmark Strait's chill embrace, oil slicks blooming like bruises on the sea's face. These weren't aces rides, no glory loops for the newsreels spun in Whitehall's mills. They were the grinders, the ones that bled slow and steady, tonnage by tonnage, from convoy shadows to Biscay patrols. U-boat by U-boat in the wolf pack's endless prowl, until the Kriegsmarines starved for fuel and the convoys steamed unmolested to Murmansk's icy docks. But the Fiat CR-42 haunted Louis's steps back to the hangar through sheets of drizzle that beaded on his lashes like unshed tears. Her biplane frame a relic of faded empires stitched from linen and ashwood, wings yet to marry fuselage, but already whispering of Calais 40 in the stutter of arc welders nearby, where she tangled with hurricanes over Dunkirk's bloodied beaches amid the pall of burning oil tanks, turning tighter than a noose in dives that left monoplanes spinning wide into the surf. Italian pilots, brave fools with olive skin and eyes fierce as Corsica's maquis, claiming 4 kills apiece before fuel gauges flickered red and the Channel claimed the rest in foam-flecked graves, parachutes snagged on wrecks that barnacles claimed. Eastern Front next, the bitter pill of Barbarossa's winter, snow-choked skies over Stalingrad's ruins where the Volga froze red, her open cockpit a freezer vault where frost-etched moustaches white as birch bark, outpacing Polikarpov I-16s in mock charges across the steppe, but folding under Yak-9 fire by the thaw of 43, 12.7mm rounds punching through struts like hot knives through butter. Italy's surrender in September, scattering her flock to scrapyards from Tobruk's salt flats, where Rommel's panzers rolled unchecked until she harried their flanks in hit-and-fade raids, to Tunisia's olive groves under torchlight evacuations. Recovered from that Swedish wreck in Lapland's white silence, pilot's bones long dust under a cairn of stones, she's rising now, 80 years defiant with new dope gleaming wet, to loop again where eagles fell in spirals of smoke and silk. Her Fiat A74 RC38 engine, a 12-cylinder growl, reborn from crates in Turin attics. Luke, pacing the autogyro's pad under a tarp that sagged like a weary sail, felt her odd pulse through gloved fingers, the rotor idling lazy on its gimbal, freewheeling like a prayer unanswered, prop tugging forward like a reluctant dog straining at leash. Sierva's mad genius from 23, crash-proofing flight when wings still snapped like twigs in turbulence over the Ebro. RAF trials in 41, hovering her over Dover's radar masts, to tweak pips that flickered like Morse from the ether, slow as a heartbeat in the fog of impending doom. precise as a sniper's breath, calibrating theodolites, because one wrong blip and eagles would have darkened the cliffs unannounced, their shadows falling on Parliament's spires before sirens wailed. Deeper in the dome's hush, where the air hummed with the faint ozone of old electronics, the mosquito's shadow loomed largest for Luke, her wooden veins a middle finger etched in ply to doubters who scoffed into Haviland's drafty offices. Glue over guns, balsa from Ecuador's jungles rationed tighter than tea, prototypes dodging flak in secret valleys over the Welsh borders until brass capitulated with grudging nods. Then factories hummed with cabinet makers, turning bombers faster than Luftwaffe could blink, over 7,781 souls by VE Day, from leaves planed smooth to wrecks hauled from Norwegian bogs. Oslo 44, Operation Jericho's thunderclap, she gutted Gestapo cells at Amiens prison with 500-pounders slung low, slipping coastal radar like a thief in the gloaming. Merlins singing high notes that pierced the fjords, while 4 cannons chewed flak towers below into rubble that choked the Seine. Lowest losses in the Pathfinder force, they tallied in ledgers yellowed by time because she flew away from infernos that claimed Wellington's wholesale, crews toasting in pubs with tales of ditching in fjords where the wood drank the waves like a sponge, buoyant frames washing ashore with maps intact for the next run. Goering's rage echoed in Luke's recount from dog-eared memoirs, green-eyed fury at the splinter that splintered his empire from within, her props a blur that outran night fighters bred for the hunt, like the Ju-88s that prowled the moon paths, only to find empty skies and echoes. As dusk bled the sky purple over the control tower's silhouette, the B-29's bulk swallowed Louis whole in the American hangar's vaulted nave. Superfortress, atomic avenger, with a wingspan broader than a Lancaster's Envy, her bomb bays echoing with the weight of 2 suns, dropped on cities that burned eternal in the archipelago's haze. 3,000-mile hauls from Tinian's coral airstrips, where B-24s once ferried parts across the dateline. Turrets slaved to gyros that gunned down Oscars before they could rake fuselages with 20mm spite. Pacific Kings in the Marianas campaign, she and her sisters firebombed Tokyo to ash on March 9th to 10, 45, 334 B-29s, unloading 1,665 tons of incendiaries that turned the Sumida River to a moat of flame, crews sealed in pressurized tombs at 30,000 feet, watching hell unfold on Norden sights and drift meters. Not rare in numbers, over 3,900 built in Renton's Roar, but singular in Sin, the beast that folded the Emperor's fan with Little Boy and Fat Man, the Enola Gay's kin thundering home with bays empty and souls heavier than lead. They met at last under flickering floodlights that buzzed like night fighters on standby, voices hoarse from shouting over props that idled nearby. No victor, but the machines themselves. These rarities, unearthed from Duxford's vaults like bones from a mass grave, proving war's weird underbelly wasn't won by speed alone or firepower's brute math, but by the odd, the overlooked, the ones that whispered survival when thunder failed and the maps redrew themselves in ink and ash. Luke paused, wiping rain from his brow, to sketch the Blenheim's raid on Wilhelmshaven in 39, the war's first naval strike, her nose turret chattering defiance at flak that peppered the Jade Bight, while Louis countered with the Swordfish's Channel Dash volley in 42, 9 string bags from Manston, braving 300 mph winds to torpedo Prince Eugen and Gneisenau under Goering's fighters, one hit amid a storm of lead that left 4 ferries as wrecks on the mudflats, the rest limping home. With props feathered and prayers spent, hours slipped into the gloaming, tails piling like sandbags against a flood, the Lysander's moonlight pickups in occupied Belgium, agents tumbling from hatches into nettles while patrols crunched gravel mere yards away, the autogyro's eerie patrols over Scapa Flow, rotors whirring silent as she spotted periscope wakes in the Orkney's mist, the Fiat's Balkan brawls over Greece in 41, tangling with gladiators in canyons carved by ancients, her turns a ballet of death that claimed Blenheim straying too low. Each story a thread in the tapestry, woven tight with the grit of men who flew them, mechanics with oil-black nails reciting Merlin manuals like scripture, pilots nursing hangovers from last night's rum ration, navigators plotting stars through canopy scratches, and the women behind the lines, riveters in shadowed bays whose hands shaped the mosquito's skin, plotters in bunkers tracing raid paths on maps that bled red from overuse. In the end, as cheers faded from the grandstands and hangars locked for night with clangs that reverberated like final telegrams, Luke and Louis trudged to the gate through fog rolling off the ooze, like cigarette smoke from a last drag, mud-caked boots sucking at the path, alive with the day's fire that no deluge could quench, the rain a soft patter now like applause from the departed souls who rode these beasts into the moor. Blenheim's nose scarred by Berlin's bite, Lysander's ladder rung with the ghosts of saboteurs, Swordfish's open scars weeping dope like old wounds, Autogyro's blades etched with radar ghosts, Fiat's wires humming forgotten anthems, Mosquito's grain whispering of wooden defiance, B-29's bays echoing atomic hush. They'd touched the untouchable, felt the war's pulse in cold aluminum and frayed dope, each plane a question unanswered in the archive's dust. What other secrets rust in barns worldwide, from Idaho silos to Siberian wrecks, waiting for hunters like them to coax the tales from silence? The airshow's roar lingered in their bones like shrapnel aches on damp days, a promise that these ghosts aren't done flying. Not yet, not while stories like theirs burn bright enough to light the dark, from Duxford's fields to your screen's glow. And you? What's your pick in this aerial rogues gallery? The wooden sly one that slipped the net, the slow torpedo slinger that toppled titans, the rotor-riding freak that saw the storm coming, or the biplane bandit from faded flags. The skies are silent without your say, but the hangars hum with the weight.